Tell me what your life was like before you died.
So that was October 6, 2016. I'd just built my little flying flea. I'd had a test flight a few days before, and it was okay. It was very, experimental. I wasn't quite happy with the way it handled, so I thought, well, let me go up and get used to it. And so it was on that second test flight. I took off, came around once the airfield, and then on my next pass, my engine just quit. And I was able to get it started. I didn't panic because, panic is what kills you, so just don't panic ever. And I got it started again and it quit again. Well, I was dropping altitude. This was in Connecticut, in the countryside, and it was very hilly, very rocky, and very forested. And I couldn't make it back to my grass strip. Luckily, next door to it was a Boy Scout camp, and they had a small lake, and the front of my plane was shaped almost like a boat. And I was like, I'll just aim for that, and it's an open cockpit. I'll just land in it. Whatever happens, I'll pop the belt, I'm out. And what's funny is I had to go back to the crash site, I think it was a year later I went back, and I was able to work out what my thinking was, because when I crashed, it knocked out 2 days of memory out of me. I don't even remember crashing, which was probably a blessing, right? No PTSD. I could go fly again, no problem. So what happened was I was aiming for the lake, and I wound up, when you come down close to the ground or the water, you come to something called ground effect and actually extend your glide. So I overshot the bank. So in the equivalent of a soapbox derby car with a 7-foot propeller spinning in front of my face and a big BMW motorcycle engine, I crashed headlong into all these tree trunks. And that's how I found it a year later. I could see all the scarring on the trees from where my wings broke off. And I stopped in probably about 10 feet, and I ruptured both lungs, broke all my ribs. My right leg had multiple fractures. The battery broke loose and hit me in the back, 70-mile-an-hour projectile. Other than that, I was fine. But, luckily for me, because that was in October, the Boy Scout camp was closed. But there was this retired, essentially they reported him as a retired teacher, which he was, but he was also a retired police officer. Thank heavens, because think about it, police officers seen trauma, car crashes and all these things, and if he had just been a teacher, he might have freaked out, and that would have gotten me killed. But he happened to have his cell phone on him, which he normally did not do, because he liked to go down there for the peace and quiet to fish. And then I come in, anything but peace and quiet. So he called 911, and he kept me kind of propped up, because I said, well, what was going is you weren't breathing, you were gasping, because we know now, because you really had no lungs. So the helicopter landed as close as it could, probably only about 30 or 45 minutes later. It's like everything was incredibly efficient. I'm amazed. Starting with the fact that he just happened to be there and he knew what to do. And then they put me in the helicopter and flew me up to Hartford's trauma center, where there was a team waiting for me there. I only had one memory of when I was in the hospital, and I thought, I'm in an enemy hospital. Something I haven't told you, I also did work for the military overseas. And so I escaped the restraints. Even though I am doped up, tubed up, I am delirious, I escaped the restraints. Of course, where the hell was I going to go, But when I did, my oldest daughter was there, and she called out for help. So they came in. I remember when they came in. I think I'm escaping. I said, they're going to hurt me now. And I really thought, so they put me in bigger restraints, tighter, whatever. And then they told my wife, he's got 6-7 days of 6 to 8 hour operations every day coming up. We think we should just put him in a medically induced coma. And, especially if he's acting like this now. And she said, by all means, do what's necessary. So they put me into a coma. So my best, again, it's a best guess, right? My best guess is that when they put me into a coma here, that's when my near-death experience began. Whether it lasted a split second, how you hear how time flows differently, whether it was a second or whether it was a week, I'm not sure, but it seemed like I was there for quite a while. Well, let me preface it with this. You know how a lot of near-death experiences have a lot of similarities? I went through a tunnel. Maybe I saw some dead, deceased loved ones that certainly made me feel better about where I was, right? Maybe the surroundings and circumstances are not unpleasant, perhaps. It looks nice there. And then they have a life review, right? And that's a real common one, and it's not about judgment, but it's like you look and see how you feel you've done. And then sometimes they might get a big message or have a conversation with an angelic being or something like that, and then it's an NDE, they come back. If you think about it, that's a fairly passive experience. I floated through the tunnel, I saw somebody, I saw my life, I got a message, I went back. Mine was not passive at all. It was very interactive. First of all, no tunnel. It's as if I teleported in, boom, I'm there. And where I teleported was as if it was up on a terrace of a tall building in a post-apocalyptic city. Imagine LA or New York 1,000 years after the meteor hit or the bomb goes off or something like that, and it is a dead city. It's dead, deader than dead. And I was up there, and I was also very emotionless about this. I'm just taking it in. And as I looked around, I looked up, and the sky just had literally like the mother of all storms getting ready to unload. Then all of a sudden, this wave of nausea passed through my stomach. I said, I don't know that I can stand this. And when I said that, I heard the sound off to my left. And I looked over, and on this terrace, or at terrace level, if you will, was this large egg. And I would say it was around 4 to 5 stories high. And it was made out of lattice work. Imagine like taking metal bands and then loosely bending them and riveting them together and shaping it so it looks like an egg. But that means there's a lot of open space there you can see through, okay? So I looked over there, and I could hear this little like clacking sound inside. And I knew this thing and I are connected somehow. So I made my way over to it, and when I got up to the egg, I looked through the open lattice work, and what I saw were these gears, and I realized later when I came in, they're called sector gears. When you think of a gear, you think of a wheel with little teeth all the way around it, right? A sector gear is a partial arc of a gear, maybe a pi section, and it's designed to move back and forth, which means it has a beginning, middle, and end to its action. That's significant. And as I looked at these, and they were kind of freely suspended in space, in the air there, and they were just kind of slowly moving as if they were in idle, sort of idling. And some were very definite and, sharp. And some were more ghost-like. And they would just either way, they would just sort of pass through each other unimpeded. And as I looked at them, if I looked at one really hard, I had a video feed play in my head of what it represented. And as I looked at these, I realized these are all events from my future. Why is that? Because I saw my daughter at an amusement park with her 2 children, and at this time she was, 18 years old and still living at home, no kids, and I was there with her, and it was really nice. She was putting her kids in the little cart, goes spinning around, and everybody was having a good time. And then I don't know why, I saw myself over at Home Depot buying stuff for a home renovation project, but I saw other events as well. Here's the interesting thing. I put my hand through the lattice because I said, very concrete, very ghost-like. I wonder if I can touch these, So I did. And when I did, one of these gears brushed by my hand, and I felt this intense pain, like nausea, running through my stomach. Reflexively, and I don't know why this was my reflex, rather than just to jerk back, was to grab that gear, pull it out, and throw it away. I can't explain why that was the reflex, but that was the reflex. And when I did, it's like all the gears just woke up and started spinning around like crazy. And at some point I said, what is this thing? And that's when this disembodied voice joined me, never saw who it was, and engaged with me. And it said, this is the process of becoming. And I said, well, where am I? And it said, you're in the in-between. I said, in-between what? And it said, everything. You're standing inside the eternity of a single moment. And I said, okay. And I said, well, so what's going on here with the gears and the thing? It said, basically it told me, these are all probabilities in your future. Think about quantum physics, juxtaposition probability. And think about it, at every moment of your life, that is a crossroads of decision in which you can make multiple choice. So each moment in our life is one of juxtaposition probabilities. And it's through the act of observation and choice that one collapses into what we call reality, and the others dissipate. And I learned that was the gears, the probabilities, the choices in the future that were very sharp and definite were the ones that were either closer in time or more likely to occur. The other ones were further out in time or less likely to occur. like winning the lottery. That'd be a very ghost-like one, even though I might go in and buy a ticket, so that indicates a probability. The only thing I was there to do was to keep putting my hand inside it and finding a gear that hurt. And the pain it was causing me, I came to understand, was a potential choice in my future that would be to my spiritual detriment. And let's put it this way. Imagine one of those choices that looked pretty definite was you're going to win the Powerball. But imagine I touched it and it caused me pain because maybe I become the world's biggest jerk. A lot of things that, people might fail at. But you could imagine, tried to argue my way. Oh, come on, let me win. I promise I'll be good. You know what? Let's just cut to the chase. Here's the pain it's going to cause. Do you still want to talk about this, or do you want to just get rid of it so it stops hurting? It's almost like building a mouse maze, and there's only one way you can run it. And that came up. As I was removing these things, I even said, I turned around and saw this huge growing pile of gears, and I said, it looks like if I don't have a bad life, I have no life at all. And the voice said, your number of breaths are already counted. I will worry about your last one. And I said, I don't even know where or when these futures happen. It said, it's not important. Just have faith in the grand design. And at one point, it said to me, for those who make poor use of their choices, offering fewer possibilities could be called mercy. After what seemed like 10,000 times I did this, it was almost getting to be like torture. Remember I said every time I removed one, all the gears had to spin around to account for the loss of one. And it was getting to be like torture just to watch this thing spin around over and over and over and over again. In other words, it was so many times that it just became so unimportant what all of these probabilities actually were. And I pulled out enough until I felt I just couldn't stand it anymore of looking at all these spinning around over and over and over again. Back in the beginning, when it said, you're standing in between, and I said that, I'm having a hard time understanding it. It said, well, do you remember the world to which your body belongs? And I really tried, and I said, no. I said, then you see the truth and how the past is dust. Because I had no memory of this place. I had no memory of a family. If you'd come up and said, Jim, if you stay here any longer, you can't go back, I'd say, go back where? To your family. What family? What's a family? I had no memory of this place. As I've studied it, it's as if, and I say it's as if because, you think I'm a scholar? No. I was depersonalized down to zero. I didn't have a sense of who I was. If you'd asked me what my name was, I didn't know. I'm just a conscious being. And honestly, because of that wiping clean what seemed to be any shade of personality, what I brought back was an incredible sense of detachment. It's as if that cut at the roots of so much of my attachment here. And that's continued to be a part of my journey, is discovering the interesting lack of attachment, or to watch attachments. It's like each one of them has their own little gas tank and they're all running on fumes. Now you can imagine some attachments that go deep or long in your life have the bigger gas tank, so it has more fumes it can run on before it quits. Some things which might be no more than, I had just found a new favorite show to watch on television, they fall off right away. And I finally go, why am I sitting here looking at this? And I'm looking at things in a way that, that seems silly, or that's boring, or that doesn't make any sense. So I go do something with my time that does make more sense. Relationships, I'm sort of taking you fast forward there. But anyway, continue on until I finally, I think, said, I think I can live with this now. Because it said at one point that my being there was an answer to a prayer I had made at some point. And I think that was simply, almost like be careful what you ask for. And I'm sure it had to do with, I long to be free of the world, free of the pain of the world, free of the attachment to the world. And I would like to escape the cycles of reincarnation and go home. And it was like, well, then maybe you need to go through this. It was like going to boot camp. It wasn't unicorns and rainbows. No, it was like boot camp. At that point, when I said, I think I can live with this now, it's literally said, pay attention to your relationships. It said, okay. And then as I was sort of starting to zoom back, and it said, all choices have unintended consequences, but live life in celebration of the individual spirit and pay more attention to your relationships.